Howdy, I'm going the wrong way. Jeez. Great start to the day. I'm going the wrong direction. I think, oh, flies. Yes, I think just around this corner, this is 4th and Harvey Milk. Would have once been 4th and Stark. And I'm looking for 321 Southwest 4th Avenue, which I had kind of a hassle of a time. Yeah, here we are. It's this big building right up here, towering up to the skies. That building is today known as the Title and Trust Building. It's the Title and Trust Building or the Trust and Title Building, but that doesn't sound right. Yeah, Title and Trust Building. Now, this building was built in the early 1910s. Right here. It's towering up to the heavens so much you can't even see the top of it. There it is. So, my story, which takes place in 1907, this building wasn't even here yet. So, fortunately, the building next to it, this is the Henry Building, was around in 1907, and there's been lots of pictures taken of it, and one picture in particular dates to 1910, which was a couple years before this building was built, and it shows in this vicinity what it's almost like a dark colored 2-story house, but that would have been right here, so it would have been the site of the saloon in question, which was run by a fellow named Martin Denny. And knowing that Martin Denny ran this place actually is how I was able to figure out the saloon was right at this spot. So, there were a lot of drunks in Portland, and because there was a lot of drunks, there was a lot of saloons. And, you know, people that ran saloons, sometimes they got a little sketchy. There was always, you know, saloon owners getting into trouble for one thing or another. And Martin Denny was a guy that he periodically would get himself into trouble. And so he would pop up periodically in old newspapers, and that's how I was able to figure out that his saloon was right here, was because I found one article that just listed a bunch of saloon owners. And one of them was Martin Denny. It just said Martin Denny. It's just the owner, not the name of the saloon. I don't even know what the name of the saloon actually was, but it just said Martin Denny, 89 4th Avenue. And this is pre-1930, so 89 4th Avenue would today be 321 Southwest 4th Avenue, which is right here. And that's how I figured out that the saloon was right here. And in 1907, there was a murder here. On a new episode of Historic Murders of Portland. So it's December 11th, 1907. Two guys named WIll DuPuis is how I'm assuming his name was pronounced. It was spelled capital D, lowercase u, capital P, and then U-I-S. I think it was DuPuis. He showed up here with a guy named John Wynn. Now, looking at imagery, I actually found in one newspaper they have a picture of WIll DuPuis and an artist rendering of John Wynn, and you can tell that WIll DuPuis was pretty young around this time, but John Wynn was more middle-aged, probably in his 40s, maybe even around 50. So there was like a generational gap between these two guys, and they'd actually known each other. They'd both lived in Pendleton, Oregon, for a lengthy period of their life. They lived there at the same time, and Pendleton is a good ways east. You got to go traveling a couple hours in this direction to get to Pendleton. It's out Eastern Oregon way, near the border of Oregon and Washington. And these two guys hailed from there, and here they are. They both randomly ended up in Portland together, as I guess probably a lot of Oregonians living in other parts at the time. They all probably, or at least a lot of them, ultimately kind of ended up coming to Portland at one time or another. And I don't know the circumstances. Maybe they bumped into each other on the streets. They obviously knew each other. They knew each other back in Pendleton, so they knew each other, you know, here as well. And so, I don't know, maybe they bumped into each other and it was like, oh, hey, how's it going, man? It's been a long time. You. And the fellas, as was often the case, they went to the saloon that would have been located here in the where this trust building is, right over my shoulder. And everybody else who was there said that these guys were pretty cordial with one another when they first arrived. Now, nobody really knows what transitioned the fine, bright, cordial demeanor that these two men had into something completely different. But a little while after arriving, the guys are sitting at the bar. They're both getting pretty lit. They're both getting pretty drunk. And according to people that knew him, people said that WIll DuPuis in particular was known to become very, not even just belligerent when he was drunk, but he just became just an all-out dick when he drank too much. And that would actually kind of play significance in this case as a whole, was people's perspective on how WIll DuPuis acted when he got drunk. So, again, the whole dynamic of these two guys must have changed really quick, because after a little while of sitting here and drinking, being in fine spirits, all of a sudden people hear John Wynn call WIll DuPuis a sponger, which I looked up what sponger meant, and it essentially means you're a moocher. You're someone that lives off of the, the earnings of somebody else. You're a moocher. So I'm wondering if maybe maybe they've been driving around, maybe hitting up a few other places. It was very common, when people hit up saloons in the old day, people act like bar hopping is a more recent thing. That was just the norm back then. People would hit up 3 or 4 bars a night. I've covered cases, or at least looked up cases of, murder where people get just drunk and someone kills someone. And by the time one person kills the other, they're at the 3rd or 4th bar they've been to that night. It was just a norm back then. So WIll DuPuis, who's drunk and doesn't behave himself when he's drunk, he doesn't take this sponger critique, very well. He pulls a quarter out of his pocket, slaps it down on the counter, and then proceeds to smack John Wynn right across his face. Mind you, John Wynn's like a generation older. This is like a kid smacking their parent in the face. So he probably didn't take too good to that. And apparently he smacked Wynn so hard that Wynn kind of like stumbled backwards a little bit. And in that moment, now I didn't really find a lot of information about whether John Wynn got really belligerent when he was drunk, but after that smack to the face that kind of sent Wynn tumbling back a little bit, he quickly pulled a revolver from his pocket and went boom, 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 and fired 3 shots into WIll DuPuis. The first 2 shots entered his abdomen, torso area. The first shot was probably the one that killed him, because they said it entered his chest really close to his heart. And apparently, he smacks Wynn. Wynn stumbles back. WIll DuPuis is kind of there on the edge of his stool. He maybe even stood up after slapping his quarter down. And he takes 2 shots to the chest, and he probably starts like falling and turning like this, because the 3rd and final shot that Wynn takes, they say, entered in his back. So he'd had to have, turned to some degree for that to actually happen. And he tumbled to the ground, and John Wynn immediately was like, oh no. And he took off running into like a back room at the saloon. And he was trying to like ditch the weapon. There was multiple people still at the saloon. They saw it, the owners saw it. People saw what happened. It wasn't like if you hid the weapon, all of a sudden it's like, nah, it wasn't me, I never had a gun. It's like, well, everyone saw what happened. And Martin Denny and another patron there at the bar chased after him into the back room and subdued him and made sure he didn't escape or, successfully hide his weapon, however that would make a difference. And he was apprehended, and they had to hold him down and keep him there because, of course, he was struggling and trying to get away. They had to keep him down right there until the police finally showed up and took him into custody. WIll DuPuis was rushed to the hospital, but he did die shortly after being shot. So we have yet another situation where some guys went to a saloon in earlier days of Portland, got real nice and toasty, and then someone gets pissed at the other one for whatever reason, and then someone invariably gets shot. So in the early aftermath of events, people are quick to want to call this a first-degree murder. Like, sure, Will DuPuis was, his actions weren't exactly courteous or docile, but I hardly think his actions justified what happened to him. You know, unless you equate shooting someone 3 times with getting smacked across the face, I don't really see how those are comparable situations. You know, I think it was a situation where they were both drunk, they were both getting angry, they were both getting heated, their inhibitions were destroyed, and this guy, John Wynn, acted out in such a way that likely came primarily as a result. You know, I mean, again, a lot of people were just violent in Portland back then anyway, but I think the booze definitely did not help matters in this case. And so initially the attitude was pretty cut and dry. Like, this is a first-degree murder. This guy had no right to shoot someone just because they were having this little tiff in a saloon. However, things didn't quite stay that way. And once it was discovered that these guys had both lived at Pendleton for a time, there was quick efforts made, and rumors began spreading that there was maybe this shooting was actually the result of some altercation these guys had. Maybe they had a beef with each other going back years and years, and that rumor started spreading pretty quick throughout the city, even though there wasn't, you know, some newspaper would report like, oh, well, this was due to some, you know, gripe that they had with each other, you know, 10, 20 years ago or whatever. I guess 20 years ago would make sense. Will DuPuis wasn't that old, but, you know, some newspaper would report something like that, and then another newspaper would come out and say there's no evidence that they had any issues with each other. However, about 2 days after the shooting occurred, that perspective started to shift a little bit. And it was actually reported, somebody out of Pendleton contacted the authorities in Portland and said, you know, oh yeah, I'm a resident in Pendleton, or at least I was a resident in Pendleton when they were both there. And it was generally known around the town that John Wynn's wife had an affair with Will DuPuis. So, you know, and again, there's almost a generational gap between these two guys. So, you know, Will DuPuis, this young fellow, you know, I don't even know if he would have been 18 yet, because it's the picture of him. Now, it may have been an old picture that I saw in the newspaper, but the newspaper picture of him posted when the murder happened, he looks really, really young. So I'm like, well, a couple years back, he would have been substantially younger. So, you know, I don't know what the circumstances were around that, but that started... Sorry, I had to cut. I'm not dealing with that stuff. I'm just not dealing with it today. So anyway, as I was saying, so that's a story that came out, that there was this affair that had happened. Now, maybe that was just, you know, rumors around town. I don't know if there was actual verification that had happened. But then shortly after that, there was another story that came out that started circulating that, you know, might have been an earlier Pendleton-era instigation for all this. And that was essentially that... So back in Pendleton, John Wynn ran his own saloon there. And Will DuPuis apparently ran around with this gang. Now, they didn't really raise a lot of hell, but they caused some problems. And they called themselves like the sewer gang. But apparently, again, you know, they didn't really mean that much. They weren't like brutalizing people or anything like that. They were just kind of, you know, young, rambunctious youth stuck in this, you know, Pendleton back in around the turn of the century was probably just kind of a small cow town and just not a lot to do. So you find a way to be entertained in life. And apparently they would periodically frequent Wynn's saloon. And the implication was generally made that they would kind of stir up some issues, and apparently at one point John Wynn was heard to say words to the effect of, well, one of these days I'm going to get some of those sewer gang members. So apparently he made direct, because when you say I'm going to get them, that means like I'm going to kill them in kind of older speak. So there's kind of this implication that he was maybe going to cause harm to some people in this group that Will DuPuis was a member of many years before this encounter here in Portland. So there were some stories circulating that may have presented possible motives, but we'll never know for certain. And the strange thing is, like, these guys were cordial with each other when they first arrived at the saloon. So even if they had issues in the past, is it possible that they had just kind of buried the hatchet and were generally getting along at this time, except they both decided to drink, and that is what really led them astray, was the devil's juice. So by March 2008, by March, did I actually write I wrote March 2008. March 1908, the trial for John Wynn officially begins. And he does everything he can. He just says, it was self-defense. Will DuPuis was getting belligerent and violent, and I had to pull my gun to protect myself. You guys are too late. Will DuPuis is already dead. You're too late. A lot of distractions when you try to vlog in the big city. But the trial starts going, and John Wynn just pleads self-defense. And again, getting back to the idea that Will DuPuis was known for being very, very belligerent, very rough around the edges when he drank too much, and it was abundantly clear that that's what had happened with these two guys. So that became actually a significant element to this overall case, was the fact that, because it became clear at trial that Will DuPuis could potentially threaten someone's safety with how violent he got when he drank. In this case, how could you say, well, John Wynn couldn't have possibly been justified? There had to be some doubt. I look at the situation and I think these guys got drunk and they were both belligerent, and I honestly think John Wynn got pissed. He came from an era where you respected your elders, and here he was practically old enough to be this guy's dad, and this guy just smacks him disrespectfully across the face. And it's 1907. Portland's kind of grisly, gritty, dirty. Everyone carries a gun. Everyone drinks too much. A lot of people think, if somebody disrespects them, they have the right to shoot them. I've discussed the unwritten law numerous times. People felt justified in murdering someone because they'd been wronged. Now, usually that applied to affairs and things like that, not getting smacked in the face over calling, someone cheap. But if I had to take a guess, I think they probably both were in the wrong in this, and I don't see how you justify, considering the circumstances of what happened, you say that what Will DuPuis did, slapping the coin down and smacking the guy across the face, that justifies life endangerment. I think John Wynn got pissed. He was insulted. He was offended that someone so young would attack someone who was an elder to him, and a lifelong elder. These guys knew each other for such a long time. And I think he said, the hell with this, pulled his gun out and just, pumped 3 quick bullets into the guy. I don't think he felt like his life was in danger at all. I think that was just, this murder was just kind of a sign of the times and how people were. And there was a lot more Old West vibes in this city back then. Someone disrespected you, you could cap them, and you were justified no matter what the legal system did. But the courts didn't quite see it that way. They saw it as, well, maybe Will DuPuis was, he was known to be this way, so maybe he really was putting his life in danger. We don't really know for certain. So in the end, John Wynn ends up getting charged with manslaughter as opposed to first-degree murder, and he's sentenced to only 1 year in prison. And the newspaper said specifically the big thing that affected their decision on this was the simple fact that Will DuPuis was known to get, you know, violent and belligerent when he was drunk. And how do we say that that didn't happen here? Again, I don't really buy it because the witnesses, you know, described the situation as it happened, and it seems like Will DuPuis, the most violent he got was he smacked the guy. That's not life-threatening, but, you know, sometimes the courts would just say, let's just do this. Let's just slap him on the wrist because we don't really know what to do. This seems like it was kind of one of those cases. So anyway, John Wynn, I think, kind of got away with it because I definitely think, obviously it wasn't premeditated, I don't think. Maybe he was being really nice to this guy and getting him nice and liquored up so he could shoot him later on, and he was just waiting for the right situation because he harbored all this hatred towards him from years past. But I don't know if I necessarily believe that to have actually been the case. I think it was just a situation of some guys that drank too much in that time and place where it wasn't uncommon for someone to pull a gun out when they were drunk because they got pissed. So I kind of think, jeez, there's a lot of noise. I kind of think John Wynn got away with it in that he only served 1 year for something that I think was not necessarily cold-blooded murder, not premeditated, but I don't think it was justified at all, considering the circumstances. That's my take. So did John Wynn get lucky? Yeah. I really don't think there's any debate about that, but sometimes that's the direction the wheel of justice turns you in. And, you know, that's one of the things that drives me to do this series, is just that you get to see these stories from other times, and you get to see juries, and you get to see the legal system, you get to see it work in ways that it would never dream of working nowadays. So thank you so much for stopping by, and what do you think? You think a smack across the face justifies 3 bullets into the torso area? Was there maybe a little bit more to the story that just wasn't out there? Well, I guess we'll never know. So that's just open to speculation. But anyway, thank you so much for stopping by, watching my episode, for supporting this series, for supporting my channel, for supporting me specifically. And as always, you know, if you're new to the channel, you haven't done it yet, remember, as always, to like the video, share, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. Remember to hit up my Patreon. Uh-oh, crazy person. I don't know where, but I hear it. Be sure to hit up my Patreon. I'm trying to post there at least twice a week. Various forms of extra content you can only get if you join up with my Patreon today. The link to that is in the description with this video, as well as links to my Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Reddit subreddit pages. So it's a lot of stuff. And all that said, one more time, thank you so much for stopping by and watching. This has been Steve the Amateur Historian with another episode of Historic Murders of Portland.